Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald. And today, well, we've got a couple of developments, if you want to call it that. We've got a news development. The Vikings have officially welcomed their first interview for the offensive coordinator position in Tyke Tolbert. So we'll have a little short discussion about him, his background, and what he may or may not bring to the organization. But the meat of this show will consist of a largely unfounded rumor, but also somewhat speculative with some real smoke, I suppose. I don't really know how to describe it, but the Kirk Cousins news is flying right now following the Matthew Stafford trade to the Los Angeles Rams. So we will add to that. We're gonna recklessly speculate about Kirk Cousins as well. We have our own opinions on that matter and about where the Vikings stand and whether or not they should even be engaging this type of ordeal. So we'll go through all of that today on today's show, and that'll be about it. So yeah, let's get it fired up here with some Tyke Tolbert. Really exciting stuff here. A guy that I don't think anyone figured was even in the conversation. If I had asked you last week and the week prior when we were having our discussions about Clint Kubiak and what the Vikings might do at the OC spot, I think it would have taken us a very long time to get to Tyke Tolbert as the first guy that the media has released in terms of the Vikings bringing in for a guy for an interview outside of the organization. So your initial thoughts?
You're right. Not a guy I would have thought of right away, but clearly has some ties to Kubiak in the past. To me, it seems clear based on maybe some of the comments Zimmer made at the end of the season, sort of the end of the year press conference type deal, that he really liked what the offense did this year. And with good reason. They were very efficient. Ran the ball efficiently, also threw the ball very efficiently, kept up scoring wise when the defense was giving up a lot of points. Vikings offense kind of kept them in games. And so he wants to replicate that somehow, despite Gary Kubiak leaving. And so, I think we've both said that Clint kind of elevating him is probably the most likely and maybe the quote unquote safest move to make. But I do like that they're doing their due diligence here to go out and get it and look at someone like Tyke Tolbert, who, by the way, I believe is wide receivers coach for the Giants. Right. And looking at him, seeing what he has to offer, seeing what his philosophies are, and seeing if they match up. So I like that they're doing this, not just saying, "Okay, Clint, what do you think? You ready for this?" And sure, they're doing more than that, which I like, and I kind of didn't really expect it. So I welcome it. And again, I don't know much about the guy, just that he has some ties to Kubiak in the past, and that he's currently or has been serving as Giants wide receiver coach.
So this isn't a guy that I was familiar with up until someone brought the name up, period. I know he's been in the league for a long time, but I did my due diligence myself because I want to know who potentially will be the next Vikings offensive coordinator. And you're right. The most notable era of his career is that 9-year period when he's coaching alongside Gary Kubiak with the Denver Broncos, of course, going to a Super Bowl and also winning a Super Bowl during that period of time. So he has success in that regard. Now let's talk about individual performance. Think about the receivers that he coached during that era. Demaryius Thomas being a good one. I think Eric Decker is probably a great prize in terms of a guy that he developed into being someone who was, largely regarded as an afterthought in the draft process. Thought maybe, this guy could be, a special teamer, someone that's, good on third downs and 4 or 5 wide receiver sets. But, he became a superstar, and that was under your guy Tyke here. So that's good news. Probably the most notable thing, and I imagine if he gets hired, the name that'll swirl around the most is working with the Cardinals back when Anquan Boldin was a rookie. Of course, Anquan Boldin had, before Justin Jefferson's year this season, the most prolific rookie season outside of Randy Moss. So good company there in terms of the players that he has coached. He has also been a part of some organizations that have not done so well. I saw that he's had a couple of different one-year stints. One with the Carolina Panthers, where the leading receiver that year was Steve Smith with 546 yards. So there's good and bad, like any coaching career. I could dig deep and find bad things about literally anyone. It could be Bill Belichick, and we can all do that one pretty easily. So my point being here is he's got a long history, which means he has plenty of experience working within this system specifically that the Vikings are trying to run. But more importantly, and I think something that Drew and I were both crying about when we were talking about, the idea of just promoting Clint Kubiak immediately was, bring in some innovation. This guy definitely comes from multiple different organizations that, yes, they run the same scheme in principle, but the style may be different. The calling of plays. I have no idea what his history doesn't really give credence to what type of play caller he will be. I mean, what type of system he's going to call, but is he going to call a run on first down every single play like we have gotten used to as Vikings fans? This is a wide receivers coach we're talking about here, which is interesting because Dalvin Cook has been the focal point of your offense, and now you're saying after Justin Jefferson's year alongside Adam Thielen, maybe we shift back to passing the ball a little bit more. It's just interesting that you'd hire a career-long wide receiver coach to call plays, because I imagine that while his philosophy is similar to Kubiak and Clint Kubiak by transitive property, it probably focuses a little bit more on wide receivers and how you can manipulate your stars in that regard. So that's something that I'm interested in, and I'm sure that's something a lot of you guys are interested in that want to see the Vikings move more towards 60-40 in favor of the pass, as opposed to being stuck in the 70s and 80s and running the football down teams' throats to a point where you can't really cover your losses. Coming off of this year, it seems like a great move. Something also to keep in mind here, though, is who was reported. Keep in mind the Rooney Rule is in effect. Every NFL team is required to hire a, quote, minority candidate every single cycle. That's the first one being reported. I have to ask that question immediately. Is this simply, to get that out of the way? I think that Tyke Tolbert's history speaks for itself. And I think that, he looks like a very quality candidate, but it will be a little bit annoying, and I'm sure we'll hear about it from activists and everyone else, if the Vikings bring this guy in for an interview and then tomorrow they hire Clint Kubiak. It would just be a matter of a due diligence hire, which is something I hope the Vikings aren't doing. It's good to bring in outside candidates, but it's also good to bring in realistic candidates that you're not just trying to fix into a rule. That would really annoy me as a fan, as a football analyst, and as someone that believes that the Rooney Rule should be in effect for good reason. It's just something to consider. Something to keep in mind here when you're looking at what is released by the media and what's released by the team by proxy, and what is kept in house. I'm sure the Vikings have already talked to a couple other candidates, but keep in mind, this is the first one that gets released. It's just something that pops in my mind, something that you may want to consider as a fan, or, someone who's interested in kind of the progression of the NFL and in terms of getting more coordinators that are, of African descent or Asian descent or whatever it may be. Just something to consider. And, it's coming to Minnesota here because of the fact that they have that vacant position. So a little bit on Tyke Tomlinson. Any kind of thoughts, with regard to what he brings, outside of, just being a kind of someone that worked under Kubiak and might have some, innovation from his time away from being with Kubiak?
I'm interested in his. I mean, and we're never really going to know this, I don't think, unless of course he is hired. Is the run pass philosophy, and I'm sure under Zimmer, there'll be sort of a kind of a an emphasis already, kind of ingrained into the system here to run the ball a little bit, just based on what Zimmer wants. But I hope there's some sort of a pushback a little bit there, regardless of who's hired. I mean, if it's Kubiak, great. Clint Kubiak, that's fine. But whoever it is, I want a little bit of pushback there. And, if, wide receivers coach, formerly a college wide receiver at LSU, and Tyke Tolbert. So, clearly he has a little bit of maybe a bias towards the passing game, a passing philosophy, maybe. Of course, other than that, I don't really know a whole lot. So, but I like that they're, going out there, being creative with the hire here, trying to find that diamond in the rough, because, to an extent, there's no telling sometimes really where that can be. So, I like that I really hope they give him a deep look here. So, that's all. Otherwise that's the extent to what I know here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hope that some of the founded beliefs by his former players who have spoken highly of him, I hope that carries some weight as well. He's got some nice ones. Odell Beckham Jr. is in there as well. So, there's real historical precedent to suggest this guy might be onto something, and he could bring something new to the organization. I'm sure the Vikings will look deeply into that, and maybe we'll know by next week who the next OC is going to be. But until then, we can focus on the guys that are here, at least for now.
Speaking of wide receiver coaches, Keenan McCardell joined the Vikings as wide receivers coach. Interesting move there. And I know somebody brought up Stephon Diggs back. I think he was the coach at Maryland when Diggs was there, and Diggs said something along the lines of the best wide receivers coach he's had. So clearly he knows his stuff. He's been coaching for a while now, in a role similar to that. So I mean, I like the hire as someone that's not, I don't know Keenan McCardell personally or have a ton of experience other than the fact that he was a really good player in the NFL. But I like that. So that's another, I guess, potential, something we probably should mention during this whole ordeal if we're
Yeah.
talking about coaching
Right.
changes, whatnot.
And it's also worth mentioning, just in the same breath, that he's coming from Jacksonville, keeping in mind, of course, that Jacksonville has produced, 4 or 5 guys that kind of came out of nowhere with subpar quarterback play. I understand Allen Robinson is obvious, right? He was really good, and everyone thought he was going to be really good. But there's other names down there too that have, have excelled in roles where you didn't really expect him to. How about DJ Chark, a guy that I think had some, level of credibility coming out of college, but I don't think anyone thought that he would be a number one. And you've seen other guys shine down there as well. So interesting hire, someone that brings something new. Again, I'm into that. That's big for me, especially for my, coaches that aren't your coordinator position or your head coaching position. Bring in someone who just has different ideas, so that when you're sitting in the meeting and you're just talking about the same thing for the 400th time, someone else is like, hey, what if we did this? That's when things change, and that's when you get some innovation, and that really helps, the progression of this team, who, we have been annoyed with for at least 2 or 3 years now, about just the failure to try to get into the new world NFL of passing the football more. Bringing in a guy like Keenan McCardell suggests that maybe they're interested in doing something like that. So, just something to consider as we continue to do our coaches focus here, and try to figure out what the Vikings are going to look like next season. But until then, let's talk about Kirk Cousins. And like I said at the top of the show here, everything that we're going to be doing here is speculation. There have been a couple of people who have brought up mention of Kirk Cousins being dealt to San Francisco. Reporters, people who say they have inside information, and there's also people that are, a little bit more credible. Some people are a little bit less credible, but there's a lot of news circulating. Nothing from Adam Schefter or Ian Rappaport or the big names where it's like, once they say it, it's set in stone. Nothing from them yet. But there has been plenty of news circulating about potentially, a second, a fourth, and I think Jimmy Garoppolo was the base trade that I had heard that the Vikings were not interested in. I've also heard that the Vikings have explicitly stated that they will not trade Kirk Cousins. So my point being here is there's a lot going around. I don't have answers. Drew doesn't have answers, and we're not going to pretend to, but we're going to play around with what we think we may or may not know here. And this is largely as a result of the Matthew Stafford trade to the LA Rams that happened this past weekend since we last spoke to you. Of course, Jared Goff going to Detroit, a couple firsts involved, and a third-round pick kind of set the precedent for what a quarterback trade may or may not look like. Of course, the easy move here is to pivot into Deshaun Watson, but we live in Minnesota, so instead we're going to pivot to Kirk Cousins. So, having said all that, what do you think? Do you like the idea in thought? Do you think it's realistic? How much do you believe these rumors that are circulating? And I guess bottom line, does trading Kirk Cousins here for draft picks, as the bottom line, does that make sense to you?
There's a couple different angles to go about this. Okay, so number one, the Vikings' direction as a franchise. They have recently extended Kirk. They have recently extended Spielman. They have recently extended Mike Zimmer. For a while, I've been sort of harping on the fact that those three are tied together, and that's part of the reason why I feel like a trade here is super, super unlikely. It would take a massive haul for Kirk to leave and for Spielman, Zimmer, etc. for this team to kind of abandon that, right, and sort of admit that they were wrong about Kirk Cousins. Essentially, is what that would be. So in that's essence, I don't believe a trade is going to happen. But if it does happen, where San Francisco, for example, and by the way, I fully believe that San Francisco is interested, regardless of who tweets it or who doesn't tweet it. I believe they're interested because there's been a lot of evidence to suggest that Kyle Shanahan really likes Kirk Cousins, and
Right.
they clearly could use an upgrade at quarterback, right? I believe Kirk would be a significant upgrade compared to Jimmy Garoppolo in that respect. But if a trade were to happen, San Francisco were to give up, their 12th overall pick this year and a couple other mid-round picks and blah, blah, blah to get Kirk in this deal, then you sort of, it really brings into question where the Vikings are in their direction, right? Are they rebuilding? Are they retooling? Are they trying to stay competitive? Does that mean Zimmer's going to be gone because you blow everything up after that? Like, there's a lot of questions that would have to be answered in that scenario. But long answer short, to answer your question about would I be interested in a trade if it was my decision in trading Kirk Cousins to get draft picks out of the deal, I'm saying yes, because I don't think this team's able to be competitive now, despite getting players back, things like that. I think this team's far away from being truly competitive for a title. And then you bring in an extra draft pick, you have a chance to have Jimmy G be sort of your bridge quarterback. You can afford him at that point because he's cheaper than Kirk, and then you can also draft your quarterback of the future with either one of the 12th or 14th overall pick, or you can coop them together and move up and grab one of those studs at the top. So I say if the opportunity presents itself where there's a first from like the 12th overall pick from the Niners, maybe a third and a fourth in there, something like that, to go and then swap quarterbacks, I think you do it and you sort of restart this whole thing and you kind of move towards the future, especially now that you have this superstar receiver entering his second season in Justin Jefferson.
Okay. So there's a lot to break down with just this entire situation.
Yeah.
First and foremost, you mentioned the validity of it. I don't know. Again, we don't know, but you're right. The Kyle Shanahan, where there's smoke, where there's fire type of thing, it could be realistic. That's why we're talking about it today. So that's about as far as we're both willing to go in terms of how realistic it is. But it's fair. It's a fair thing to discuss, I think. The second piece being, does this make the Vikings better now? I think that the definitive answer there is no, unless you expect that two new rookies and Jimmy Garoppolo is going to make this team better than 7-9, which I certainly don't. You're expecting then, if you're for this trade idea, that this is a future play, a move to get the Vikings in position to be a championship contender, and probably around the end of Rick Spielman's tenure, which would be interesting once again. That's one way to look at this here. If you're a Vikings fan who believes in Kirk Cousins, you're pissed that this trade even exists. If you are the Vikings organization, you have to do your due diligence, right? You have to see how much you could get. Every player has a price, except for maybe Patrick Mahomes. I think Pat Mahomes is the only guy that you couldn't give me anything, just because having him on your roster puts you in Super Bowl contention immediately. He's the only guy.
I wouldn't even argue Deshaun Watson is up there too.
Well, you think so,
especially based on what Stafford fielded.
Right.
I think it's possible, but that's kind of a different conversation right now. I think it almost puts the Vikings for sure out of the question in terms of getting Deshaun Watson.
Right. Okay, so Kirk Cousins is essentially what I'm saying here, to simplify it, is he has some value. Do I know what it is? No. Do I have an idea based off of what we've seen from Matt Stafford, Sam Bradford in the past? Sure. And is there a level where I think it's more acceptable than not? Do I want to get rid of Kirk Cousins just to get rid of Kirk Cousins? No, I don't, because I think he keeps you competitive and he's going to make for exciting football games. Do I want to trade Kirk Cousins if there is a way to get better in the future, namely a first-round pick or two? I'm more into that idea, because I think that I'm with you that the Vikings are in a similar situation to the Rams. If they miraculously are great on defense next year, I don't know if they have the quarterback to get them all the way. I mean, if the goal is to go all the way, you make this type of swap because you don't believe that Kirk Cousins is that guy. I personally don't. I'm sure there's plenty of our listeners that do. I've seen enough. I don't think he's that guy. I think he's good enough to give you 10-6, maybe win a playoff game here and there. I don't think he's taking you to the Super Bowl. So in that sense, I'm interested. Because if you can get a great enough value for this guy and reset with this draft class, and I think next year also has a very solid set of just young players in general to build around, I think you have to consider it. You have to at the very least consider it. You have to be on the phone with John Lynch, see what he's up to, see what he's thinking. Now, if he comes back and says 2-4 and Kirk for Jimmy Garoppolo, 2-4 and Jimmy Garoppolo for Kirk, I think you turn that down, because I don't think that's making you better. It's not worth it to me. It doesn't do enough for this franchise.
Yeah.
But if you move Kirk and you get that 12, like you said, you can package that and theoretically move up to get maybe Justin Fields, for example. That's interesting. That becomes a situation where you're not going to be better next year, I doubt, or I highly doubt you're going to be better that next year. But in 2 years, you might be. You could be great in a couple of years, depending on what your evaluation is of Fields or the BYU quarterback or anyone else in this class not named at the top of the draft there. So it's it's a situation where, or do you think Kirk's good enough to do it? And I think a lot of us have seen enough. So does this make sense for the Vikings? I think in short, the answer to that is yes. It does actually make sense for the Vikings. You get the opportunity to unload some cap. You get the opportunity to free yourself up in, I think it's 2 years with Jimmy Garoppolo's current situation, and you get the opportunity to reload around some younger players that you have bright futures for, as well as some veterans that have 4, 5, maybe even 6 good years left in them, depending on their health and whatnot. Um, do you feel that same way? Do you think that this is something that would truly make the Vikings better, assuming a first round pick is involved in this trade?
Right. I think the key is so it has a chance to raise the ceiling, if you will, right?
Right. Right.
Raise the ceiling. And I think that's what we ultimately are going for here. Right. So if you're going to trade Kirk, you got to get the first back, because at that point you're then making the move to get a quarterback in this draft. Right. And but when I say quarterback, I mean one of those top 3 guys, right? Obviously Lawrence is going to go 1, but then I'm talking about Fields or Wilson, one of those guys. One of those guys that looking at from the outside could be a franchise-changing franchise quarterback. And so that's part of this move. Is it's not just trading Kirk because of his contract, or trading him to get rid of him because he can't take that next step. It's because you have the chance to start over with another franchise quarterback who could be the guy that gives you over the top. Now, obviously, we know the hit rate on first round picks, and this is part of the reason, as we saw today, why the Rams keep trading their first round picks. It's because the hit rate isn't that high for superstar players. It just isn't. But I think the Vikings are in a spot now where it's probably time to start taking that chance to really make a run. And when I mean make a run, I mean make the necessary moves, make the Kansas City Chiefs move to get to the next level. What they did a couple years ago, of course, Alex Smith had a phenomenal 2017 season, his best season as a pro, and that didn't matter to them. They knew he wasn't going to be that Super Bowl winning quarterback. They made the aggressive move from Holmes, and then they won a Super Bowl. And they arguably could be going for 3 in a row if it's not for Tom Brady going to Arrowhead and having one of the games of his life. So that's what I'm talking about. It's that move that the Vikings probably should make now, after seeing a very large sample size of Kirk Cousins through 8, 9 NFL seasons. So that's where I'm at. Like, you don't trade Kirk unless you can get that 12 overall pick to kind of make a push for one of these quarterbacks in the draft. And if that's the case, long haul, I really do think it's the right play for the Vikes.
So you have to consider a number of different things here. Assuming that San Francisco is in fact interested, which I think it's fair to speculate that they may or may not be, with Shanahan at the helm. And I think the fit is actually really nice for Kirk Cousins. You think about, I saw someone say this on Twitter, that Kirk wouldn't have missed that downfield throw in the, it was in the Super Bowl 2 years ago.
That would have iced the game.
Kirk doesn't miss that throw. So there is a real upgrade here, in terms of accuracy, precision, And
a healthy Niners team, right? Like, obviously they
really
had
good.
an unbelievable amount of injuries last year, but a healthy Niners team is a serious threat. It's a really good football team.
Yeah.
So you get that all around Kirk, and we talk about things that, the situation or the supporting cast that Kirk needs. It's all there in San Francisco. It really is. It's just, and then plus you get Kyle Shanahan, scheming things up for him. I think it would be better for him, for him and his career as well in here. Let's not forget about that part of it. I think this would be an upgrade for Kirk as well. And so he would probably play better. He would be more likely to maybe fall into I don't want to say it. This might be kind of outlandish take, but I truly believe this. If he goes to San Francisco, there's a better chance he's going to win an MVP than in Minnesota. And so it would be better for him. I think it'd be better for the Niners in the short term, trying to still compete given what their roster situation is right now. And I think for the Vikings, long term, I think it's better too.
So we've established now that, I think the major point here to take away is that the idea of trading Kirk Cousins raises your ceiling. I like that point that you made. I think that's the best thing here, because it's facts. Because what Kirk Cousins' ceiling is right now. Or I think we have a very, very, very strong guess as to what Kirk Cousins' ceiling is. He's not getting any younger unless he does, some Kurt Warner, Rich Gannon stuff. He's not going to miraculously turn into a top 2 quarterback in the NFL. It's just not going to happen. So we know who he is. So this does, theoretically raise the ceiling. On the flip side, it lowers the floor as well.
Mm-hmm.
I
Oh
think
yeah.
it's important to make note that, like you were saying before, there's a reason the Rams keep trading away their draft picks. Is because when you trade away a draft pick for a player, you know what you're getting, or you've seen real evidence to suggest the guy can make it in the league. When you're trading for a draft pick, you're opening the door to the unknown. Now it's a very high potential unknown, especially when we're talking about the first round, and what you can potentially get there. But you are lowering the floor. This is a scary, risky move for a guy like Rick Spielman, who, if he fails here, he's done. That's it. So, like, this is a make or break situation. It's not just like Madden where you click A and all of a sudden you got Kirk Cousins on San Francisco. We're talking about people's lives and
Yeah.
jobs and everything.
Well, this
here.
is the exact reason why I would be absolutely stunned, like floored, if the Vikings were to trade Kirk Cousins, unless it's a massive, like overwhelming haul for him, right? You know, Rick Spielman is tied to this guy. You know, he bet essentially his job on Kirk Cousins. Mike Zimmer, in a way, is doing the same thing, or has been. So it's, I mean, and we should also touch on too, like the ownership of the Vikings, as great as they are, right? As phenomenal as they are, they got the stadium in place. They're, you know, real estate moguls, right? Like they're awesome. But what they want and what's best for this team in terms of if the decision to kind of rebuild, restart, or to try and stay competitive, you make more money by trying to stay competitive. You just do. I mean, you got more games that mean something in terms of the playoff race. An 8-8, 9-7 season where you've got a Week 17 game with playoff implications. I guess in a normal season, you're going to sell more tickets that way. You're going to have more fan interest. You're going to have more discussion on the internet. You're going to sell more apparel. You're going to do all that stuff. That's going to be way more appealing to the owners on a 3-13 season, or a 4-12 season, where you're out of the playoff race by week 11 and things are going downhill. So in that sense, that's a big reason, I think, in my opinion, of the way I see things. Of course, I've never talked to the Wills, but that's why I think they are such big fans of Kirk Cousins, because he's definitely not bad enough to bring you down to 5-11, right? That won't happen with Kirk. He's good enough to keep you competitive for 16 weeks of the season in the playoff race, which is what he's done in each season as a Viking quarterback. And I would imagine that would be the case in the future. It's just, I think there's a clear difference between staying competitive for the wild card spot or a NFC North title at 11-5, and then actually home field advantage Super Bowl race, that type of thing. And that's where the difference is to me. And that's why I would make this gamble if presented to the Vikings.
So essentially what that means, what I'm hearing from you in terms of ownership, right, is if you're going to trade away Kirk Cousins, you better get me a very marketable player. And that means probably you better get me a first-round quarterback, and more specifically, probably Justin Fields.
I'm turning down second and a fourth too, or whatever the rumored original deal is, which may or may not even be true. But I got to get at least that 12th overall pick plus an extra mid-round picks in this deal, because we should also talk about Jimmy G. That guy can't stay on the field. So in this sense,
flip him to New England too.
Well, that too. You can also flip him anywhere. Houston. I mean, they need a quarterback too, apparently. So there's other teams that do need quarterbacks, and that could also be a part of this. But again, I know you also don't like Sean Mannion being the backup quarterback, so that's something to consider here too. You bring in Jimmy G, you better add a quarterback, which is part of the reason why I would prefer to go Jimmy G as the bridge, and then draft your sort of quarterback of the future if you need to. Both out of this deal if you're going to get rid of Kirk.
So it sounds like you and I imagine a lot of our listeners are probably boiled this down to, like, it's a hard no unless there's a first involved, and then we'll think about it. That's kind of what it's coming down to here. Because if you don't get the first, this deal doesn't make sense. It ends up, you're not getting enough cap space back to warrant just getting a second and a fourth for a guy that, he may not be a top 5 quarterback, but he's probably 6, 7, 8, 9 on a good day. On a good day, Kirk Cousins looks really, really good. On a bad day,
he's borderline top 5, I'd say. I mean, he can pick defenses apart. That's, it's just the difference between he and your Mahomes, your Wilson, your Deshaun Watson, your Rodgers, is that these guys don't need the perfect pocket, right? They show up in the games where they're maybe not supposed to show up, and they win those, and they carry their teams to victory on their backs, where Kirk has a very small sample size of that, but those guys
Right.
have a humongous sample size of that. So anyway, there's going to be a bunch more speculation on this for sure, but the Vikings, I think what you said about doing their due diligence here in terms of you saw what the Lions got for Stafford, and in a way, that's kind of the benchmark I would think for what Kirk could field in a trade. Now, I think part of this too we should keep in mind is that the Rams are in a way paying the Lions another first round pick, I think, to kind of take the Goff contract off their hands.
That's important.
Which is, again, because it's in a way, it's a little bit like the Brock Osweiler trade where I think was it Houston shipped a second round pick to the Browns for them to take Osweiler or something along those lines. So it's a little bit like that. So it's not quite a apples to apples situation here for Kirk, but Kirk and Stafford are, I would say, comparable in the long run in terms of what they bring to your football team. They're both very talented. They're both for sure in the top half of starting quarterbacks. So there's a good sort of, measuring stick to use there to see what Kirk's worth. And I think the Vikings should at least be calling, because it happens all the time where an average-ish starting quarterback is just highly demanded for in the trade market. I mean, Sam Bradford's a great example, and a team can take advantage of that.
Okay, so we've established now the precedent, the sensibility for this deal, right? What needs to happen, what we need to see happen, and is it even plausible? We've established that. Now, I think the final question here is that needs to be answered when anytime a blockbuster trade like this that will kind of resituate your franchise and put you in a different direction is this the right time to do something like this? You just mentioned Sam Bradford. When the Vikings traded the first to the Eagles in order to get Sam Bradford, it was the right time to make that move. Did it pan out the way we thought? Maybe to some degree, kind of, because I think a lot of us thought he might get hurt and that might happen. Did it pan out the way the Vikings wanted? No. But is that relevant here? No. What the question that I'm asking is more just the time was right. The Vikings needed to make a move. They had no other choice. That's why the Eagles were able to get a first. The Vikings are not in dire straits in this situation. They have the quarterback. They have the, quote, asset in this deal. Does it make sense at this moment for the Vikings to look at rebuilding? I know you've touched on this a couple times that, like, we've seen a lot of Kirk. We don't really know that he can get to you to where you want to go. But you also have to consider that Mike Zimmer's contract is expiring. He wants to win immediately. This is a trade of Kirk is going to push that back at least 1 year. Unless you draft for Brendan Roethlisberger again, I don't see a season like that happening from a rookie quarterback maybe ever again. You're pushing the future back. So is this the right time for us as fans? Maybe some of us might be sick of Kirk, but for the organization, for the Wilfs, like you were talking about, who want to make money coming off of a huge down year because of COVID-19, is this the right time to make this type of deal?
See, I feel like I am maybe more down or pessimistic about the current roster than most. I just see a ton of holes, and a lot of it has to do with the depth, right? There's absolutely no pass rush to speak of besides of Daniel Hunter right now. I think we saw the linebacker situation when Kendricks would go down, kind of suffered quite a bit. And Eric Wilson's future is to be determined. Cornerbacks are obviously extremely raw still. Harrison Smith isn't getting any younger. Anthony Harris' performance dipped a little bit. Offensive line is not great right now. Certainly the interior has to be addressed, and then identify where Ezra Cleveland's going to play. And then at receiver, Adam Thielen's not getting any younger. You probably want a third option there that's viable that you can, eventually stick opposite Justin Jefferson in there to take some pressure off of the kid. Eventually, I'm not saying Thielen is losing a step or anything. I think he's still a stud. And so there's a ton of issues I think that need to be addressed, which is why, like, I don't see simply getting these guys like Barr, Kendricks, Hunter, getting those guys back. Michael Pierce is suddenly going to make this team competitive or an NFC North contender. And with that said, that's why I think now is the time. Despite the Zimmer deal or what's going on with his situation with the team or Spielman, that's why I think now is the time. I think you got to accept that your team's not going to be competitive this year and just kind of move forward with the future, sort of start over. And I think if the trade market's hot now, if there's if it's a seller's market, if you will, I think you got to take advantage of that. And then, of course, with this QB class, we have a bunch of studs. It seems like I would also make this move now. I think the time's right, but I might be a little bit more down on the state of the roster than most.
Something to consider here. Generally, when you hire a head coach, most organizations take into account their quarterback's opinion. Houston, of course, doesn't do that, but that's neither here nor there with regard to this show. Something to consider here is that the Vikings have not hired a head coach despite having more than enough time to do so. And like we were talking about before, they're just now starting to release names of guys that they brought in for a conversation. To me, I'm curious if this type of thing puts that on hold a little bit. If you're like, I want to interview candidates for who the quarterback's going to be, it's something to consider because is the quarterback going to be Kirk Cousins or is the quarterback going to be someone else? This presents a little bit of a time, it kind of makes this more of a time sensitive issue. Something needs to get resolved here. Unless you do want to go the route of just, whatever, I'll hire the guy and he'll help draft the quarterback. That could be something as well. My point being here is that these conversations are connected, as everything in football generally is. And I think that there's reason to suggest that the Vikings might be at the very least looking into this. And I think they should be. I think they have to be given the circumstances around the league. And
Yeah.
you're right. I think this might be a seller's market as a result of what Detroit just did. Detroit literally reshaped the landscape of the NFL with that deal.
Yeah. I mean, they're gonna stink for a couple more years, but they're set up for, when they can get out of that Goff contract, and they do have a couple opportunities the next couple of years. Really, they can draft quarterbacks and see how they turn out. And they're set up for the long haul here, with what they've gotten in return from the Rams, which is going to benefit them. It's going to be like the Dolphins, right? Dolphins quickly turned things around after that. Was it 2018 or 2019 that they had a terrible year? Brought it back, and under Flores, they've turned into a competitive team. They're really a quarterback away from being something really good, which is, again, quarterback away. We've heard that before, but so it's one of those where the lines are set up that way similarly, and so I think it's just, again, the trade's probably not going to happen. I'm 98% sure Kirk Cousins is staying in Minnesota, but I think you're right. They need to at least look into this and need to at least see what kind of demand there is for a top 10-ish starting quarterback in the NFL who can put up points. He can put up points, he can put up yards. Obviously, there's other concerns with his game, but there's always going to be a demand for a quarterback at that level.
Absolutely. That feels like a good place to kind of put a pin in this. I'm sure these discussions will continue to swirl. These rumors will continue to, go until something is put, concretely, and, someone comes out and says something. That's another thing here. No one's actually disputed these rumors. No one's came out and been like, nah, this isn't happening. I think there's real smoke here. I'm with you that I don't think anything actually gets done. But I think Rick Spielman is smart enough of a GM where he's going to do enough, which will probably get blown out of proportion. But he's going to do enough to make sure that the Vikings aren't missing an opportunity here. Because if nothing else, this is an opportunity, something to look at. I mean, if San Francisco throws 2 firsts at you, you slam the phone down, and you call the league office and put the trade ticket in. You have to. You have to consider the future, even if you're, specifically Mike Zimmer, your contract doesn't align with it. You hope that.
Yeah, I mean, who your quarterback is ultimately more important than who the head coach is. I think so. I think that's more important, who the quarterback is. And so if you're able to swing a deal for the head or for the quarterback, right, where you bring in Jimmy G as your bridge, and then you have the chance to draft your future, I think that's more important than, say, where Mike Zimmer's contract status is right now. I think you worry about that second, where certainly his leash would be shorter in that scenario. Right. But anyway, we're going to keep doing this. It's going to be fun. We're going to talk about all these. We're going to see a rumor on Twitter here in a couple days, and we're going to fire it up, and we'll talk about it next week probably. But I live for Kirk Cousins speculation because of how wide the range of opinions is on him. And so we'll always keep doing this here. But I think we're trying to stay level-headed while also entertaining, entertaining what could be and what, really, I want to replicate what the Chiefs are. I mean, I do. That's what I want this team. And there's just a lot of steps that would have to happen for something like that to take place. But that's what I want, is the Vikings to replicate what the Chiefs are doing.
But in order to get to that point, you do need to take step one. And fair question. Is this step one? Is this is an opportunity here, if nothing else? So, yeah, we will put a pin in this for now, and I'm sure we'll be discussing this probably next week because I don't see anyone, fanning this fire out. This is getting bigger by the hour, and we'll see if there's any fire where we sense smoke. So, until then, you can find our shows on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever else you listen to your shows. You can watch us on YouTube. Make sure to check us out on Daily Norseman, as well as the rest of the Climb in the Pocket team who are producing shows, both live and recorded. Plenty of options for content there on Daily Norseman. Make sure to drop us a line if you have something to share, or you have an opinion on all this. I mean, this is kind of the fun of doing a show, right? Is that we get to come up here and we get to talk about it, and you guys get to, share your thoughts with us too. I mean, there's no right answer. That's the best part about Kirk Cousins rumors, is that no one's got a definitive answer. This isn't Patrick Mahomes. This isn't Brock Osweiler. This is some guy that some days looks like Brock and some days looks like not Patrick Mahomes, because no one looks like him, but you know what I'm saying. So we want to hear from you. Drop us a line if you want. And we appreciate that. So thanks as always for listening, and we will catch you guys next week.